In the heart of Appalachia, hidden among misty hills and winding dirt roads, there's a house that seems almost alive. People in the valley don't talk about it much, not because it's abandoned, but because of the woman who once lived there. Her name was Catherine. On the surface, she was a picture of a quiet, obedient bride, soft-spoken, graceful, seemingly harmless. But behind the locked door of her bedroom, something far darker unfolded. Neighbors whispered of strange habits, midnight rituals, and a presence that made even the bravest men uneasy. Her husband tried to understand it, tried to escape it, but the walls of that room kept their secrets. What really happened in Catherine's bedroom, and why do whispers of her story still haunt the mountains decades later? Tonight, we're stepping inside the world that nobody dared to explore until now. Before we unravel Catherine's chilling secrets, hit like and subscribe to History Uncensored for more untold stories. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And if you've ever heard a local legend that made your skin crawl, I want to hear it. Long before Catherine became known as Appalachia's bride, she was just a quiet girl, growing up in one of the most isolated pockets of the mountains, the kind of place where silence feels heavier than sound, and every neighbor knows your family history better than you do. Catherine didn't fit the typical mold of an Appalachian child. While other kids ran through creeks, climbed trees, and chased fireflies at dusk, she preferred sitting alone on her grandmother's old wooden porch, just staring into the forest. For hours. Sometimes until the sky turned black. People noticed. People talked. They said she had a way of looking at the woods like she was listening to something no one else could hear. And the strange part, the woods seemed to listen back. Birds would go silent when she walked by. Dogs avoided her. Even grown men joked nervously that Catherine's presence made the air just a little colder. But the thing that truly unsettled people wasn't her silence. It was her eyes. Calm, steady, unnatural for a child. As if she already knew something the rest of the town hadn't figured out yet. Some claimed she was gifted. Others whispered she was cursed. And her parents, they never explained anything. But one event in Catherine's childhood would set the stage for everything that came later, especially the secrets that eventually followed her into marriage. The moment people truly realized Catherine wasn't like other children came one autumn evening during a community gathering at the old churchyard. It was supposed to be a simple harvest celebration, music, pies, lanterns hanging from tree branches, the kind of night where even the mountains seemed to relax. Catherine arrived with her mother, dressed in a pale, almost colorless gown. She stood quietly near the edge of the crowd, watching everyone with that same unnerving calm. Everything was normal until a little boy tripped and began crying near the fire pit. Catherine didn't comfort him. She didn't rush over like the other girls. She simply walked toward him slowly, very slowly, and placed a hand on his shoulder. Instant silence. Not just from the boy, from everyone nearby. The crying stopped immediately, replaced by this stiff, unnatural stillness in the boy's face, as if someone had pressed a mute button on his emotions. His mother later said he didn't speak for hours. From that night on, people kept their distance. Some said Catherine had a calming presence. Others insisted she drained the energy from anyone she touched. Whichever version you believe, one thing was clear. Catherine's childhood was the beginning of a mystery the mountains wouldn't forget. And the man who would one day marry her had no idea what he was walking into. By the time Catherine reached her early 20s, her quiet strangeness had become part of local folklore. Most families in the valley assumed she would never marry, not because she was unkind or unattractive, but because nobody felt entirely safe around her. So when word spread that a young man named Thomas wanted her hand, the entire community reacted with the same expression, confusion mixed with a pinch of fear. Thomas was an outsider, not born in the mountains, not raised in their superstitions, not warned about Catherine the way the locals were. He thought the stories were exaggerated. Strange? Yes, but dangerous. Surely not. The wedding took place in a small wooden chapel, lit only by candles because the generator had mysteriously failed that morning. People joked that Catherine had something to do with it, but no one laughed very loudly. Thomas stood at the altar, fidgeting with his tie, unaware of the nervous glances passing behind him. Then Catherine walked in. The guests said the temperature dropped almost instantly, as if someone had opened a door to deep winter. Her dress was simple, old-fashioned, and unnervingly similar to the one her grandmother used to wear. Her gaze never left Thomas, not even for a second. Not during the vows, not during the prayer, not during the moment she became his wife. And though Thomas smiled, he later admitted something strange happened. The moment he touched her hands, her skin felt warm, but the warmth didn't feel human, whatever that meant. It was only the beginning, because the wedding night would reveal the first true crack in the illusion of a normal marriage. Thomas would later say that the uneasiness began the moment they reached the house, Catherine's family home. The same one she'd grown up in, tucked deep in the mountains where the trees crowd so thickly they almost touch your windows. He assumed they'd move somewhere new after the wedding, but Catherine insisted they stay. It's safer here, she told him. Safer for who, though? She never explained. Inside, the house felt frozen in time. Faded wallpaper, antique furniture, portraits of her ancestors staring down from the walls with expressions that looked more like warnings than family pride. But what unsettled Thomas most was the rule Catherine mentioned casually. as if it were no big deal. "There's one room you never enter unless I'm inside it," her bedroom. At first Thomas thought she was just shy, nervous about sharing space, maybe protecting her privacy. Newlyweds have their quirks. He tried to laugh it off, but the more he explored the house, the stranger the atmosphere became. The hallway leading to her bedroom always seemed colder. The floorboards there creaked differently, almost like they were reacting to his presence. And on the very first night, after Catherine closed the bedroom door behind her, Thomas heard something, a soft sound, a rhythmic sound, not quite humming, not quite chanting, something in between. It was the first moment he wondered if the stories about her weren't exaggerated after all. If the rest of the house felt old and unsettling, Catherine's bedroom felt wrong. Not visually, Thomas actually described it as surprisingly neat, almost delicate. But the energy of the room, the atmosphere, that was something else entirely. Thomas wasn't allowed inside unless Catherine invited him, and during the first week of marriage, she never did. Instead, she disappeared into that room every night, locking the door behind her with a key she kept on a thin chain around her neck. Now, to be clear, the issue wasn't that she wanted privacy. Every couple needs space. The issue was what happened inside the room, because every night, like clockwork, Thomas heard the same series of sounds through the door. First, the soft dragging of furniture, then the rhythmic tapping, slow at first, then faster, and finally, the whisper-like murmur that sounded too controlled to be talking but too emotional to be humming. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was intentional. Thomas said it felt like listening to a ritual without understanding the rules. And every morning when Catherine emerged, she looked peaceful, too peaceful, as if her nights were more important to her than anything she did during the day. One evening, curiosity finally pushed Thomas past fear. He placed his ear against the door. What he heard made him step back instantly, because someone else, or something else, whispered back. Thomas froze. The door was solid oak, thick enough to block out most sound, yet the whisper he heard was clear, too clear. It didn't belong to Catherine. It didn't even sound human. It had this strange, layered tone, like two voices speaking at once, one low and one barely above a breath. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, but when he stood there long enough to force himself to listen again, the whisper stopped instantly, not faded, not drifted away, just stopped, as if whatever was inside knew he was there. The next morning, Catherine stepped out of the room looking rested, almost glowing. She smiled softly and placed her hand on his cheek. "You didn't come inside," she said, not as a question, as a statement. Thomas nodded, unsure what she meant. Catherine's fingers brushed the side of his face, lingering just a second too long. "That's good," she whispered. "You're not ready yet." That word echoed in Thomas's mind for hours. What was he supposed to be ready for? What exactly was happening inside that room every night? And then things got worse. Because one evening, Catherine forgot to lock the door, and Thomas finally saw what she kept hidden. Once Thomas glimpsed inside Catherine's bedroom, nothing would ever feel normal again. He described it later as stepping into a world that obeyed its own rules, a place where time seemed distorted, and the air itself held a weight that pressed on his chest. There were objects neatly arranged in ways that made no sense. Candles placed at strange angles, small items he couldn't identify, and a mirror that reflected light differently. It wasn't a normal reflection. Sometimes it seemed to ripple, like the room itself was breathing. Catherine didn't notice him at first. She was completely absorbed in whatever she was doing, moving with a meticulous grace that bordered on ritual. Thomas tried to speak, to ask questions, but the words stuck in his throat. Every sound felt out of place, too loud, too jarring. The more nights he spent trying to understand, the more he felt his own mind fraying. Sleep became impossible. Dreams were invaded by the same patterns he saw in the bedroom, the mirror, the rhythmic tapping, the whispers. Soon, he found himself avoiding the house during the day, taking long walks just to escape the memory of the room. His friends noticed, his family noticed, but even talking about it was impossible. How could he explain a world that defied explanation? It wasn't fear that consumed him, it was obsession. An obsession, in Catherine's presence, was dangerous. Days turned into weeks, and Thomas's mental state began to unravel. He became hyper-aware of every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of candlelight. Even the wind outside felt like it was carrying messages he couldn't decipher. He tried to confront Catherine, to demand answers about what she was doing, but she would only smile faintly and say, "You don't understand yet, not everything is meant for you to see." Her calm, almost tender words twisted into a torment of their own. Thomas started doubting his own senses. Was the whispering real, or had he imagined it? Were the objects moving, or was he seeing shadows dance in the candlelight? The neighbors began to notice his decline. Thomas stopped attending church. He avoided the market. Even simple conversations became unbearable. His once confident demeanor faded, replaced by a haunted stiffness. By the time he reached the breaking point, Thomas admitted something chilling. He feared Catherine, but not in the way most men fear a stranger. He feared losing himself to whatever power, whatever darkness, lingered inside that room. And in the Appalachian mountains, stories like theirs don't stay hidden for long. It wasn't until months later that the full depth of Catherine's world came to light. One afternoon, a distant cousin visiting the house discovered a small, leather-bound diary tucked beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom. The cover was unassuming, almost fragile, but what lay inside was anything but ordinary. The pages were filled with neat, deliberate handwriting. At first glance, they seemed like a simple journal, but as the cousin read further, a pattern emerged: lists of rules, instructions, and nocturnal schedules that made no sense to anyone outside the room. Every ritual Catherine performed, every sound Thomas had heard, was carefully documented. Some entries were almost poetic, describing the sensations and emotions she sought to evoke. Others were clinical, precise, as if she were recording experiments on the boundaries of human perception. And then there were the final pages. Pages written in a scrawl that seemed to shake with energy. They spoke of a presence she believed lived in the shadows of her bedroom, a companion that guided her actions. The cousin left the diary behind, terrified to take it, but news spread quickly. Thomas finally read it himself. Every whispered sound, every rhythmic tapping, every pause in the night, it was all planned. Every unsettling detail was intentional. For the first time, the truth sank in. Catherine wasn't chaotic. She wasn't merely strange. She was deliberate, and her bedroom was a stage for something far older, far darker, than anyone had imagined. Thomas read the diary in disbelief. Each page confirmed his deepest fears. The bedroom, the nightly rituals, even the whispers he thought were imagined, all part of a carefully constructed world Catherine controlled completely. Some passages were particularly unsettling. Catherine wrote about creating a space where she could manipulate mood, perception, and even the fears of anyone who entered. She described patterns of sound, light, and motion designed to provoke unease, to test limits. Yet she wrote with pride, almost delight, in her mastery. It wasn't malicious in the traditional sense. It wasn't meant to harm physically, but psychologically. Thomas realized it had already broken him in ways he didn't yet fully understand. The diary also hinted at her own upbringing, a lineage of women in her family who had practiced similar rituals, always in secrecy. This wasn't new. It was inherited. Thomas felt trapped between awe and terror. He loved her, or thought he did, but now the love was laced with fear. For the first time, he saw her not just as his wife, but as an enigma he might never fully comprehend. And he understood why Catherine had always insisted, some things are not meant to be shared. Catherine's story didn't end when Thomas finally left the house. In fact, the legend only grew. Locals still whisper about the bride who turned a quiet Appalachian home into a place of mystery and unease. Travelers passing through the mountains report feeling sudden chills near the old family house. Some claim to hear faint rhythmic tapping on certain nights, like footsteps in an empty room. The diary, eventually turned over to historians and folklorists, became a source of fascination, not for horror alone, but for the glimpse it offered into a mind that thought differently, acted deliberately, and transformed her private space into something almost ritualistic. Modern psychologists studying Catherine's writings argue she was a master of control and perception, someone who understood how isolation and atmosphere could shape human behavior. But for the people of the mountains, it's simpler. Her house, her bedroom, her story, they are warnings. Warnings of what can happen when obsession, secrecy, and talent for psychological manipulation collide. And despite the passage of decades, the fear lingers. Stories of Catherine's nighttime habits are told to curious children and daring visitors alike. Her presence is gone, but the legacy remains. The mountains remember, and so does the house, waiting quietly for the next soul who dares to enter. What makes Catherine's story so enduring isn't just the mystery of her bedroom or the psychological impact on Thomas. It's the way she blurred the line between ordinary life and the uncanny. A bride by day, a master of rituals by night, she reminded everyone that appearances can be deceiving, and that the most chilling secrets often hide behind the most familiar faces. Today, tourists and ghost hunters seek the house, drawn by legends of whispers and shadows. Some swear they've seen fleeting shapes moving behind windows, others report inexplicable drops in temperature. Skeptics dismiss it as superstition, but the locals know better. Stories like Catherine's don't fade. They embed themselves in the land, the mountains, the very air. Catherine, Appalachia's most controversial bride, may be gone, but her bedroom, the epicenter of her secret world, has become immortalized in whispers, warnings, and stories. A place where the ordinary and the eerie coexist, reminding us that some doors are better left closed. The question remains, would you dare step inside if you had the chance?